Hello once again, everybody. Welcome to Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, and also site of our continuing series of virtual Voices of the Game programs. Today, we're going to talk to longtime umpire Perry Barber. Perry's been a frequent visitor to Cooperstown in the past. She's been here for our symposium and also was here for the film festival that we had up until last year. We had to cancel last year's event because of what's been going on nationally and internationally as well with the pandemic. But today we will have Perry joining us from an automobile, actually, in New Mexico. Perry is making her way to a tournament in Las Vegas to umpire a number of games coming up. So we'll talk to Perry about a number of topics. We, as always, want to thank the Ford Motor Company for being our sponsor throughout 2021. They sponsor all of these programs: virtual Voices of the Game, virtual Legends, curator spotlights, and some of the other virtual field trips that we offer here digitally, virtually, through the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Our guest today for virtual Voices of the Game is Perry Barber. Perry has been an umpire since the early 1980s, has worked over 6,300 games during her career. She has worked spring training games, minor league games, collegiate games, World Cup games, and other forms of international competition. Perry, welcome to the program. It's good to see you. I had a chance to interview you a couple of years ago at the film festival. How have you been?
I'm still kicking. I took a year off last year because of the pandemic, but I'm back to umpiring now and about to dive in head first, working a tournament in Las Vegas, 4 games a day, 2 days in a row, and then 2 on the third day. So I will be very tired by Sunday night, but I was thrilled that you asked me to do this, Bruce, and happy to stop and take a break from driving.
Yeah, it's a long drive for you to get there. You've been on the road for several days.
Well, I left Tuesday afternoon later than I had planned to, and I had to go a different route because there was a lot of bad weather heading towards the East Coast, hail and tornadoes. So anyway, I stuck to the southern route, which is slightly longer, but I didn't have any problems with the weather, thankfully. So
4 games tomorrow and 4 games Friday. You mentioned this was a tournament in Las Vegas. Are these high school, college players? Who's involved?
This is an adult men's tournament run by the MSBL, which is one of the largest adult men's baseball, amateur men's baseball organizations in the country. They have a World Series in Phoenix every year that draws 150 teams from all over the world and goes on for almost the entire month of October. So this is just an outcropping of that and a chance for me to get out of Florida, which I haven't done in the last 6 months. So
it's going to be tiring, but I imagine you're thrilled to be back on the field. It seems like a while since we've been able to pursue our regular pursuits.
While I was inert and not working the past year, how important being active is to me and my metabolism as I age. I'm not the spring chicken that I used to be, and now
seem to have lost Perry momentarily. Hopefully we'll be able to reconnect with her in just a moment. We're going to talk to Perry about the breadth of her career starting in the early 1980s. We'll talk about her time with the Wendelstedt School. Harry Wendelstedt, great umpire, late umpire. He and now his son Hunter have run the Harry Wendelstedt umpiring school for many, many years. And that was really where Perry got her start, learning to become an umpire, to do it at the professional level. Starting in 1982. We'll talk to Perry about that. We'll also talk about how she got started doing some intra-squad spring training games for the New York Mets in the 1980s. I had a chance to meet some pretty interesting people, including Hall of Famer Tom Seaver, also longtime Mets pitching coach Rube Walker. We'll talk to Perry about the 2008 exhibition game between the Mets and the University of Michigan. And this was very interesting. This was a game in which all four of the umpires were women. Perry was the home plate umpire, joined by three other female umpires for that historic game. We'll also talk about some of the pioneers in terms of women who have umpired. We'll go all the way back to the first female umpire who ever was paid to umpire games. And that was Amanda Clement. And that was actually back before the turn of the century, back in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. We'll also talk about another important pioneer, Bernice Guerra. In 1972, she actually became the first umpire to work organized baseball, worked a minor league game in the New York Penn League. That did not go that well. It was a little bit of a setback, but it was still an opportunity for Guerra to establish her name and establish a precedent for women in organized baseball as umpires. We'll talk about more recent pioneers as well, including Pam Postema, who was quite a prominent figure back in the 1980s. So Perry, it appears you are back with us. For that, we are very glad. I want to go back to this photograph. You actually emailed me this photo, and it just had a very simple caption, which I've replicated here: from the ballroom to the ball field. You have to explain this one because I don't know the full context of it.
My twin sister Warren and I grew up in New York City, and we grew up in what I call an embarrassingly white milieu, somewhat privileged on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. We went to private school. We were not geared towards athletics or athletic achievement. We were geared towards getting into a good college and marrying well. So needless to say, neither of us followed that pattern. My twin sister, thankfully, became my first steady umpiring partner about 10 years after this picture was taken, which was at the International Debutante Ball in New York City, which, was a very ceremonial thing. Girls used to present themselves as ready for marriage, but now it's taken on a much more charitable meaning. They raise money for different nonprofits, and they still do it, believe it or not. But anyway, this was 1972, and if you look on the right, on the far right, that's me on the center right, and my escort on the right side of the picture to my left is Ira Wall, who 7 years after this picture was taken, 7 years after my mother bitterly objected to my choosing him to be my escort because he was considerably older than I was, he won an Academy Award for a documentary that he made about his cousin Philly called Best Boy. That is just a marvelous film and still used as a template for a lot of training tools given to people who deal with mentally challenged people in group settings. And his film basically revolutionized the way mentally challenged people are taught and housed. So I'm still friends with him too. So that's what this is from my sordid past, I call it, before I was an umpire.
And you mentioned your twin sister. So
yes,
very
my
much
twin sister
identical. Yeah.
Yeah, and bless her heart, when I first decided I wanted to be an umpire and was told by the Little League assigner who hired me, I can't get anybody to work with you. Nobody wants to work with a woman. I called up my sister who was living in Los Angeles and said, I need a partner. And she stepped up to the plate for me. She went to umpire school with me in 1982, the very next January. And she umpired with me for the next 6 years until I'll never figure it out. She decided she wanted to get married and have kids. I mean, what? But anyway, we were partners for several years, and it was the privilege of my life to work with her. And then 32 years later to work with her younger son, my nephew, Warren. And we worked a Mets spring training game together. So And my sister unfortunately died 10 years ago.
Mm.
And I want to thank you for giving me the chance to talk about her, because she was my North Star. And if not for her support and partnership in those early years, Bruce, I probably would have quit early on and my life would have been a lot different.
Mm.
So thank you.
I did not know that she had passed away. She must have been quite young.
Well,
Can you
we
talk a
were
little bit more about what happened?
57. Yeah, she died 10 years ago, and I'll never stop missing her. It's, just a sadness that never really goes away.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for the love and the support that I felt from her. Being a twin, an identical twin, is just, of all the things that I've ever done, or, people say that I've accomplished, to me, the thing always made feels identical. And I'll always be an identical twin. I'm a lone twin now, but still an identical twin. And that's Warren, my sister.
Yeah. Now in this photograph, looks like she's smiling a little bit. You look a little more serious. Did you enjoy?
Oh yeah, Warren was always the mischievous one, leading me down the primrose path into deep, deep doo-doo when we were kids. And then stepping back and letting me, pay the penance for our various shenanigans and escapades. Yeah, she actually convinced me to drink, it must have been 3 gallons of water, until I was in such pain that I couldn't even stand up. And I mean, how does somebody do that to a thinking human being? Just convince them to drink 3 gallons of water all at once for some reason. Yeah. She got me to swallow a bottle of children's aspirin. She swallowed the other half, but when our mother came home and saw the empty bottle, guess who swallowed the whole bottle all by herself and had to get her stomach pumped at the hospital while my sister got a tour.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, certainly not anything we're going to advise for people to do here. You survived it and your sister survived it, but
Yeah.
Not something that we want to pursue anymore. You mentioned that photograph, 1972, a decade later, very different look, very different setting. You're at the famed Wendelstedt Umpire School in Florida. Here we see you with not only Harry Wendelstedt, who's on the right. He was the essentially the owner and operator of the school until he passed away about 10 years ago. And then you were telling me the umpire on the left, Randy Marsh, who was just beginning a long and good career in the National League. So we see you in the middle. Now, are you on the left or the right of the two in the middle?
I'm on the left of the two twins with the curly, what I call my bozo look, the curly hair. And there's my sister looking elegant and glamorous somehow. So, back then, it was very difficult for us to find the proper attire for umpiring. We couldn't buy regular umpire uniforms because everything was too big. So we had to go to the boys' departments at department stores and just do our best. And that's something that is, even now in 2021, a big problem for women umpires. That there are a couple of companies that are easier for fitting pants and shirts, not to mention chest protectors and shin guards, because if those don't fit, it's a matter of safety, and plate shoes as well. Women with small feet, we have to just improvise, and I've been doing that for way too long. So it's a big problem, but we tried. And my sister, like I said, she could have been wearing a burlap bag and she would have looked fashionable. So
tell us more about this experience, Perry. When you first showed up, what was the reaction of the other students? What was the reaction of Harry Wendelstedt?
Well, after the second day, I think Harry called my sister and me into his office and said, "Girls, this is the first time in the history of my stewardship of this school that I have ever had to make this request of any student, much less 2 students. But will you please start wearing bras And so we decided that discretion was the better part of valor. We didn't want to be a distraction. You know, we had grown up in New York. We were hippie flower children in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, it was 1982 and we were still young and toned and, you know, but we didn't want to, you know, make it about us. So that's one of the things that happened when we first got there. A lot of the male students viewed us with tremendous suspicion, sure that we were planted there to get them to lose their focus so they wouldn't get the jobs that they had given up 5 weeks out of their lives and a considerable amount of money to earn. And so, yeah, we were not welcomed with open arms. But I actually went back the next 3 years in a row, along with Phil Cuzzy, who has been a major league umpire for a long time. He was my schoolmate those 4 years in a row that I went. And we both went back all those years because we wanted to prove to the instructors that we were coachable and had learned and improved enough that we could convince them that we were, you know, worthy of a job in professional baseball. And of course, for Phil, that happened. But for me, it never really did. The only professional experience I've had is in the Atlantic League from 1998 to 2001, the first 4 years of its existence. And that was just, so much fun and such a great league in its infancy. And they got all these great players back then, major league players on the way up and on the way back down. And it was just a lot of fun. Joe Klein, who had been the youngest general manager, I think, ever in the history of me, when he managed the Texas Rangers, took the helm of the Atlantic League and hired me. And he had my back every step of the way. He was a prince. And yeah, that was a great experience working in the Atlantic League.
Yeah.
I called Jose Canseco out on strikes.
Did you? All right.
And he took it like a pro, too. Did not say anything, just went back to the dugout, which I appreciated.
Yeah, very nice. Let's go back to 82, that first year at the Wendelstedt School. What was the reaction, not from the other umpires in training, but from the instructors? Did they treat you well? Did they give you a fair year?
Well, back then, my issue was that the instructors really did not know how to evaluate women students. They viewed the males there with what they could project, what they could see for them in the future. But for me, I mean, and I wasn't even trying to get a job my first year, maybe the second and the third years. And any woman that followed me, and probably even the women that preceded me, because Pam Postema had been a graduate of Harry Wendelstedt just a few years, I think 74, 75 was when she started. So by the time I went to school, she was just being promoted to AAA. But the instructors, I don't think, gave women the same leeway of being able to project what they would become after years of experience and training and practice and support. Instead, all they could see was what was right in front of them, which generally, you know, was dedicated, but not yet to the point where, you know, any of us was going to earn a job. That was clear.
Yeah.
But it's very different now. Excuse me. But the thing that the umpire schools have to do, because, you know, Bruce, they are the only conduit through which an umpire gets a job in professional baseball, meaning in the minor leagues. So the schools really have to make a much better effort to draw women to the schools as students. They have never done that. They're still not doing it. They just take whoever shows up, basically whoever has the time and the money, which to me has never really made sense. Why not spend a little time, effort, and money on going out and recruiting, you know, the candidates that have a real viable chance of becoming great umpires, instead of just saying, well, we get enough students who show up every year, we don't have to recruit, which is true. But to me, it's a big stain on baseball that there are no women umpires yet. When the NBA has had 7 already. The NFL has had two. Of course, one doesn't really count to a lot of people because she only refereed during the strike. But the fact that there have been two that have umpired at that high echelon is just, I said, like a huge stain on baseball to me, and very inexplicable that it hasn't long ago come to the realization that women are not a threat, we're an asset, and that we do things for baseball that are actually good for it, that make it improve, that make it look at itself, that make it correct what's not working, what's not good. And slowly and surely we are making progress. It takes a lot of time and perseverance, but women are nothing if not persistent.
We're going to get back to your career in a moment, but I want to follow up on this subject. How many women umpires are there currently in the minor leagues? And are any of them, in your opinion, relatively close to maybe getting that major league promotion? Is that realistic in the near future?
It is realistic, and it's a possibility for two women, Jen Paul and Emma Charlesworth Seiler, both of whom will be embarking upon what would have been their 5th and 6th years in pro ball, but now will be their 4th and 5th. And they're only in high A now, which is relatively slow progress up the hierarchy. And I think it's because baseball still doesn't get it. You don't have to season women, like meat. We're already, well prepared and very coachable, and they don't have to spend any extra time getting the women ready for a major league slot than they do the men. And there have been instances of men skipping AA entirely, getting promoted after 5-6 years. The standard is about 8 years, and there's no shortcut to a major league job. You just can't get the experience and the training that's necessary to do that job at the highest level unless you put in the time in the minor leagues, getting that experience. So Emma and Jen have the best shot right now. There are two women that actually went to umpire school a year ago, January, who also got jobs, who would have been in pro ball now, Greta Lang Henry and Isabel, I can't think of her last name. But if all goes as planned, they will be in pro ball this summer when minor league baseball starts up again. And hopefully more will follow suit, because this one at a time thing that baseball does, because I think there's this unspoken fear that, one at a time we're manageable, but in groups we're just too scary. The estrogen is too much for men to handle, and they concoct all kinds of bizarre consequences, like this torrent of raging estrogen crazed banshees is going to break down every barricade, and baseball will be rendered completely not what it was, ruined, and it will be overly feminized and something like that, when in fact empirical evidence already attests to the fact that that's not going to happen. That's not the way it happens ever. And that it will be only a very few talented, dedicated, focused women with the drive, the ambition, and the stamina to succeed and to last without getting hurt, because, there are so many factors that go into making it to the major leagues. All that time spent just working your way there with only a hope and a prayer that you don't get hurt, have a career-ending injury along the way. It's fantastical that anybody ever makes it to me. And the odds are just as astronomical for umpires. So yeah, we need to support those women and get more women to the schools. And thank you for bringing that up, because a lot of people don't know about the pipeline and how narrow it becomes the farther up the ladder you go. So by the time umpires get to AAA, that pipeline is very, very narrow. Turnover at the major league level does not happen every day. They don't want to give those jobs up.
Yeah. There's a lot of inertia. There's a lot of inertia at the major league level.
Inertia.
Once you're an umpire,
Inertia.
you're established for many, many years. It's very different from being a player. We see players constantly being shuttled between the majors and AAA, players being released, being waived. It's very different with umpires. Now, Perry, I think it comes down to three things, three abilities. Do you have good eyesight? Number one. Number two, do you know the game? And then number three, do you know the rules? And obviously, anybody potentially can have those three things. I don't have the eyesight. I never have. I've always had problems with my eyes. I'd like to think I have good knowledge of the game and fairly good knowledge of the rules. But if you have the eyesight, knowledge of the rules, knowledge of the game, anyone can do it. Am I correct?
Well, I would add, you have to have the constitution, the inner fortitude to allow you to continue and to want to continue, even when you get very little praise, very little support, and mostly criticism and contempt and objectification for putting forth your best effort. But umpires learn early on that the greatest satisfaction always comes from within ourselves anyway, that all of that external praise or criticism, it can help because it can teach us what we need to work on, or it can teach us what we need to work on about ourselves in the way we respond to certain stimuli, which is a big part of umpiring, dealing with the different personalities and the different places and circumstances. It takes a lot of practice and counter intuition to learn all of that, because sometimes umpires have to be very counterintuitive about how we conduct ourselves out there so that we don't allow a game to deteriorate into unnecessary mayhem, which is just a time waster. And most umpires don't like wasting time out there. We like a game to go very smoothly, progress nicely, and players make the outs, batters swing the bats, and everything ends happily. Somebody wins and loses, obviously, but everything goes and everybody walks out there happy, satisfied, and the umpires feel like they did a good job. And to me, that's my no-hitter every time. So it's a lot about game management, which is an invisible aspect of umpiring that a lot of people don't see or really focus on when they evaluate umpires. It's more like how accurate he was. Oh, he blew that call. When in fact, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But there's a lot about all those aspects that go into what makes a good umpire. But I think more than anything, it has to be what's within an individual to, first of all, make him or her want to be an umpire and to make him want to stick with it.
Oh, your point is,
and believe me, I was lucky. If it weren't for my mother convincing me that I should umpire Little League at the summer of 1981, I don't think I ever would have thought of doing it myself. But she connected some dots that I hadn't and said, here's this Little League looking for umpires. Why don't you call them? I looked at her like she was out of her mind. But the more I thought about it, the more it just seemed like something that would be fun and challenging. And it turned out to be. 40 years later, it's still fun and challenging.
That's good. Personality with the ability to withstand criticism, the motivation, the passion for the game. These are obviously all qualities that you have shown during your career. Shortly after the Wendelstedt School experience, you got a bit of a break when the New York Mets gave you a chance to do some of their intra-squad games in spring training. Here we have some great photographs. The one on the left is from 1990. And that is you with Tom Seaver. And then the one on the right, I don't know if that's the same year, might be. And that's Tom Seaver on the left and Rube Walker, longtime Mets pitching coach. Must have been a spring training instructor at this time. And he is on the right as the three of you sit in the dugout. Tell us about your relationship with Tom Seaver. Obviously, he took to you very well.
I don't even know if I could legitimately call it a relationship. It was just a one-night stand, Bruce. That was all it was. And he was just fooling around, and he was a lovely man. And just this was actually one of a series of photographs where we ended up on the ground in the dirt. And it was a very fun moment for me. And I'll be forever grateful to the photographer, Bob Dobbins, a good friend who died just a couple of years ago, for taking that sequence. But Rube Walker in that other picture, I think he was still the Mets pitching coach when that was taken, but he also came down to fantasy camp. And he's the answer to a great trivia question, which is, who was the catcher that called for the pitch that Ralph Branca threw to Bobby Thompson in the 1951 playoff series, where Thompson nailed it and hit what's forever after been called the shot heard around the world? And the answer is Rube Walker. He was the catcher for the Dodgers that day. It wasn't Roy Campanella.
Wow.
It was old Rube, yeah. So his name is etched into history, probably not the way he wanted it to be, but he was a lovely Southern gentleman. He introduced me to a guy who later asked me to marry him and became my first fiance. It didn't work out. We broke up later on when he decided to move to St. Louis, and I couldn't stomach becoming a Cardinals fan, so I broke it off. Yeah. But Rube was just a lovely guy, and I loved doing the Mets fantasy camps because my love for baseball was generated by reading about it, about the old-time players. I fell in love with Christy Mathewson and the 1905 New York Giants and the older players. So getting to hang out, on the ball field with them during fantasy camps. And I work a lot of them. I still do, for the Tigers and I've worked so many of them, the Reds, the Phillies. And they're always just a lot of fun. And this was the only year that Tom Seaver ever came to a fantasy camp. Really? So we were all very, very fortunate. Yeah. Just to hang out with us. It was great year. I think at 1990 or 91. And Steve Zabriskie and Buddy Harrelson were running the fantasy camps then.
Really?
So it was, and the reason he came was because they asked him to. Yeah, and Buddy actually was the one who hired me for the Atlantic League, because he and the guy that was the CEO, when they needed somebody to be a supervisor of umpires, I sent them a letter and said, hey, I've done all of that. I can do that for this league. And Buddy said, sure, yeah, give you a job. So, of course, then later during games, he'd run out on plays with me and say, Perry, why are you here? Why are you here? That was a bad call. You don't belong here. And I'd say, but Buddy, you hired me.
You obviously had some great experiences with these former Mets, these coaches. I know there were difficult experiences too. A friend of mine, Don Leibel, who's a writer in Utica, New York, which is about an hour from here in Cooperstown, he did a long interview with you, and you talked about some of the difficulties you had. Todd Pratt, backup catcher, was not that friendly to you.
He took a little offense to my presence right away. It wasn't just the fact that he thought I missed a pitch or something. He just kind of took an attitude with me. And when I called him out on strikes during the game, he was not happy. And when he got back to the dugout, he started whacking his bat against, the wall in the water cooler. And somebody on the other side of the infield yelled, hey, Pratt, next time, try swinging the bat when you're up at the plate. But I have to tell you that since that time, I've gone back to fantasy camp, and he now is an instructor there, and we get along just fine. And, it happens on the ball field. But most of the time, ball players sense that I'm not out there to make it about me. And I'm not out there looking for a date, especially now that I'm considerably older than most of them. So I don't get nearly as much pushback or attitude before a game even starts as I used to. So yeah, it's still fun. And you know what? I'm grateful to players like Todd Pratt, because it's taught me how to conduct myself in a way that doesn't end in, mayhem and chaos and bad feelings.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful to him for that.
When you're put in a situation like that, chauvinistic remark, some kind of crack is made in your direction, what do you do as an umpire? Do you ignore it? Do you not say anything? Do you maybe wait to say something later on? What's the best way to react when something like that occurs and you're really kind of put in an awkward position?
Well, there's no one hard and fast way to deal with any of that. And that's a lot of what goes into the makeup of a good umpire, is being able to figure out, what do I do now that will squelch any, rising level of testosterone, so that things don't erupt and flame out and somebody winds up getting hurt.
Yeah.
To make that determination, it takes a sense of, oneself and the people around who are the reason that you're considering all of this to begin with. And so most of the time, you don't want to feed into it or, bait whoever's doing it. A lot of the time, if you let them just do that a little bit, they'll lose their steam and things will progress. Other times it's obvious that if you don't take control, if you don't take charge right away, that it's going to become a lot worse very quickly. Yeah. So you learn how to put your foot down without throwing your weight around, because that's what umpires, most of us, don't want to do. We don't want to be officious. We don't want to be out there and, swing our privates around just to prove that our balls are bigger than somebody else's. We really want the game to progress in a way that shows that we're professionals and that this is the way we go about our business, because it reflects on us as umpires every time a fight breaks out or an ejection report has to be written. So it's a tricky thing trying to figure that out. I have a longer fuse than a lot of umpires, but there are times when I sense I got to do something right now or it's going to get bad. And of course, then the accusation always is, well, you're going beyond the limits of your job or what the rules say you can do. Well, maybe, but I'm also preventing, 20 minutes from now, a huge fight where two guys wound up, going to the hospital. So that's my feeling about it. I would far rather err on the side of caution and being nice or being severe, I should say, than not. So, yeah, it's a very tricky thing to figure that out. And that's what makes baseball so fun and challenging still, every game, because something like that will happen every game. And it doesn't matter whether it's with 10-year-olds or 60-year-olds or anything in between. Yeah. There's always that challenge of something will happen. You have to use your head and figure out a way to deal with it so that the game can go on.
Let's talk about this very interesting story that I had not been aware of, but you sent me the clipping from the Los Angeles Times. It's from February 2008. It was a spring training exhibition between the Mets and the University of Michigan. There's Willie Randolph, the Mets manager, standing next to you. And this was great. 4 women umpires. You, of course, home plate umpire, it appears. Isla Valcarcel, I hope I'm pronouncing her name properly, Teresa Fairlady, and Mona Osborne all joined you for this game. My understanding is, reading the article, that this was your idea. You kind of put this together on the slide.
I did. None of them knew what I was planning until the day of the game when everybody rolled into the parking lot. And when it became apparent what I had made happen, the looks on their faces was just priceless for me. And it was so funny when we were in the dressing room talking about our rotations, because umpiring with a crew of 4 is very different than what most of us were used to, which was working with only one partner. So we were discussing coverage and who was going to cover which play. And Charlie Samuels, who at the time was the Mets equipment manager and who was the one who hired me, opened the door and he looked in at the 4 of us sitting there, and he didn't blink an eye. He just looked at me and he said, "Okay, you know what you're doing." And he shut the door and left us alone. And thankfully, we had a great game. everything just went like a dream. And the next day in the papers, there was that picture, and generally warm reviews and quotes from players like David Wright saying we had done a phenomenal job. And it was just everything that I had hoped it would be, because it had never been done before. I'd worked with one woman partner and two women but never a crew of four women. So this was the first time that it ever happened in spring training. And unfortunately, it's the only time. I have not had the opportunity to do that, because ever since, when I would go back to umpire, the Mets would say, oh, we only want 2 umpires for this intra-squad, or 3 occasionally. I've never since asked them, had them ask me to put 4 umpires out there. But hopefully someday it will happen again legitimately, that a crew of 2, 3, or 4 women will walk out on a spring training game and then repeat it during the regular season, because it's far, far past time for that to happen. And I'm hoping that, I'm sorry?
Did Willie Randolph say anything about this to you, or he didn't comment?
He was, I had met Willie several times through the auspices of Arthur Richmond, who was the Mets executive who originally hired me to umpire their intra-squads way back in 1985. And Arthur did it not because he expected anything, but because he saw something in me and he was willing to take a chance. I mean, he really put his reputation on the line to hire me to umpire those games back in 1985, because only Pam, she was the only one umpiring pro ball. Other than that, I think women umpires were regarded as a bad joke. And I could have severely blackened his reputation if I hadn't gotten through that first game without anything untoward happening. But apparently I did well enough that it solidified a 35-year relationship with the Mets, where they've kept on hiring me year after year. And because of that, I've been hired by other teams to work their inter-squads and split squads as well. This year, there weren't any, unfortunately, because of the strange spring training and the way the seasons have gone. But hopefully it will happen again, and we'll get crews of women out there. So
Willie was okay
a great
with
day.
it, right?
As far as I know,
yeah,
he didn't say, yeah. And yeah, because like I said, I met him several times, and, he gave me a smile and seen me umpiring games before, but he'd never come out for a home plate meeting. I think he realized this was, a momentous occasion. And there, he saw the photographer from the Daily News. And I had just mentioned to a friend of mine, Bill Madden, who, as you know, is a Spink Award winner. I'd mentioned he likes to go to a bar in Tampa and sing Frank Sinatra. So I had been there with him and Pete Caldera doing Frank Sinatra karaoke. And I just mentioned to him, hey, tomorrow I've got this crew, I'm going to work the Mets. And his eyes lit up and he said, oh, I want to send somebody there to take pictures. And so that picture rocketed around the world. And that was our 15 minutes of fame. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. And it was fun opening up people's eyes to the fact that women can work together and do a really good job out there on the ball field.
Perry, let's talk about some of the very early pioneers in the umpiring field. I want to go back to the beginning. We actually, here at the Hall of Fame, we have a virtual field trip that we do for students. It's Women in Baseball, Dirt on Their Skirts. And we talk about this young lady, Amanda Clement, who was the first woman to ever be paid to work games. She was really a teenager at the time. This was late 1800s, early 1900s. We have in our collection here at the Hall of Fame the indicator, or one of the indicators, that Amanda Clement used, and you see it right below her photograph. But this is one of the few surviving pictures of her. So she was the one who really started it. This, of course, was not organized baseball. This was more semi-professional, but she was paid. And then many years later, we have Bernice Guerra, 1972. She became the first woman umpire in organized baseball, basically either minor league, or Major League Baseball that is affiliated with the big leagues, not independent minor league ball. Talk a little bit about these pioneers, because I know that you're a fan of history and you have looked into the stories of some of these women that have come before. Talk about how people like Clement and Guerra, even though they came way before you, have been motivating factors in your career.
There were not that many role models I could look to when I first started umpiring, but Amanda Clement was one, thankfully. And she was totally remarkable. I mean, she was not only an umpire, but she put herself through college using the money that she made umpiring. And she became a professor, not a full-fledged professor, but she became a teacher, and she taught physical education to young children, taught them how to be healthy and engage in healthy competition. And she was just so unique and a very well-known athlete in her own right before she started umpiring. And her era, the late 1800s, early 1900s, women on the ball field, as you know, Bruce, were not that unusual. Back then, more than 100 years ago, women played, coached, some of them even umpired like Amanda, and it was not all that foreign a thing. They were playing college baseball at Vassar and some of the colleges in the Northeast. There were women's teams that barnstormed, led by a woman named Maud Nelson, who I'm engaging with the International Women's Baseball Center to get her in on that list of 10 golden era candidates for induction in the Hall of Fame next summer in 2022. There are a very limited number of candidates who are considered for that, and we're working on getting Maud Nelson on that list because she was brilliant, and she and Amanda came from the same era, that late 1890s, early 1900s, and were very prominent figures in baseball back then, not just women's baseball, because there really wasn't such a thing, but baseball in general. And Amanda was very well known, very popular. And like I said, she made enough money to put herself through college with the money that she made umpiring. Bernice, of course, was the first woman to earn a job in professional baseball in the modern era. And that was after a 5-year court fight. I mean, bless her heart. She finally got the ruling that she'd been looking for, which more than just women owe her a debt of thanks for, because what she did was she got the courts to throw out the height and weight restrictions that had prevented a lot of men from becoming professional umpires too. So they jettisoned those rules because of Bernice, and she got a legitimate job. But after that one game, I think she had planned it all along, because she wanted to open the door, but the abuse that she suffered because of it was just absolutely horrendous. And I do not blame her one bit for not wanting to put her life in jeopardy, which she seriously was doing. The night before that first game in Geneva, she was in a hotel where crowds gathered outside of her room, and the lights in the hallway outside of her room were shattered by, men that didn't want her to umpire this minor league game, this single A game. And of course, she got into a contretemps with Nolan Campbell, the visiting manager, that people regarded as, the perfect excuse for why she, was not capable and didn't deserve a chance. And she saw the writing on the wall and she walked out. But she had done what she set out to do, which was to open the door. And unfortunately, it was just a very tiny little crack, and not very many women were able to slip through in the ensuing years. Like I said, it's been a trickle. One every 5 or 6 years is about all baseball has been managed to handle, because more than that, 2 at a time, we're such a bother. We require restrooms. Oh my God. And places to stay, and, uniforms that fit. Really, it's just too much. So anyway, baseball has figured out ways to discourage us until very recently, when they realized that it makes far more economic sense to include us, not just as spectators, but as participants, as active participants who want to play and teach our daughters and our cousins and our nieces and our mothers all about this beautiful game and about umpiring. So bless Amanda Clement and Bernice Guerra. Both of them were before their time, but if not for women like Bernice who are willing to bear that cross for the rest of us, we would not have the opportunities that we have today if she hadn't done what she did. So I'm very grateful to her and to
For
Amanda.
those not familiar with the Bernice Guerra story, she was hired to work in the New York Penn League, and her first game was actually a doubleheader in 1972. She worked the first game of the doubleheader. She had this dispute with the manager that you mentioned, Nolan Campbell. Apparently, she reversed a call, and that only kind of worsened.
No, we don't say reversed a call. She overruled her own call, which is the only way it can happen technically. Another umpire cannot overrule an umpire's call. It has to be the umpire that made the original decision, can get additional counsel from her partners, and then decide I missed this, important part, so I'm going to change my own call. That's what happens. So we don't like it when we say change. What did you say? The phrasing that you used?
Reverse the call over time.
Reverse. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We don't like to reverse our calls.
Now, she did finish out that first game, but then she chose not to umpire the second game, and essentially her professional career came to an end. Now, this is interesting. She did later work for the New York Mets, and she ended up dying relatively young. She died in 1992. But I'm wondering, since you had this association with the Mets, did you ever meet Bernice?
I didn't. And I am forever kicking myself for that I never pursued a meeting with her or had the opportunity to meet her. Yeah, it's one of the regrets of my life that I never met her.
Well, it was not that well known that she worked for the Mets. I did not find out about this until years after she had passed, but she did work for a time in their front office. One other pioneer that we do need to mention, and there are many that we could talk about, but certainly Pam Postema was a huge deal back in the 1980s. Her career actually began professionally in the 70s. She graduated all the way to the AAA level. It seemed at one point like she was going to be a major league umpire. Bart Giamatti apparently liked her, had hired her to work the Hall of Fame game. I think it was in '89. And then, of course, he passed away. And some of the progress maybe that Giamatti was trying to make maybe was lost with his passing. Whatever the reason, though, she never was able to get beyond AAA, never got to the major leagues. What do you think happened there with Pam Postema? Was she unfairly kept out of the majors? Do you think she had the ability to do it at the highest level?
I know exactly what happened. And it goes to this concept of having the support that you need to progress and sustain a career. If it hadn't been for Arthur Richmond putting his reputation on the line for me, I never would have umpired a Mets spring training game or any other spring training game that I ever umpired. And if it hadn't been for Pam having a champion in Bart Giamatti, she would not have gotten that Hall of Fame game. And because of the fact that he really was her only true champion, I mean, she had supervisors who at that point were willing to just go along with it. I think because they realized that if they didn't, it would make them look bad, like, misogynist, sexist idiots. So they went along with this idea that, yeah, we got a woman and she can, do it. But they weren't happy about it. But Bart Giamatti was happy about it because of the kind of person that he was. He had a poet's soul. He saw the romance and the legitimacy of getting a woman of Pam's ability and experience out there. And he became her champion. But unfortunately, he was the only one. And once he died, There was nobody else. And I know he was because I sat next to him twice at spring training games. And that's all we did was talk about Pam, because one game she was actually umpiring. And he told me that that was what he was planning on doing, was getting her into the major leagues. And that was the spring of 1989, which I think was, he died in the fall, that fall. Yeah. And she was, by the end of the next year, she was out of pro ball. And that was because another woman, Teresa Fairlady, had gone to school and gotten a job and was starting out at the very bottom rung. And so Pam was expendable at that point. They never really viewed her as a legitimate prospect, unfortunately. She, like Bernice, was before her time. She laid the groundwork. She bore the brunt of a lot of criticism and unfair reputational smears, and it must have been so awful for her. And for Teresa, who came after her, same thing. She never even got a chance to get out of rookie ball before she was given her release. And that's to baseball's everlasting shame, that they have allowed the women that have shown the drive and the dedication and the talent to be treated so badly, instead of welcoming them and saying, you're going to help make baseball better. So slowly, like I said, things are changing. But yeah, that's what happened with Pam. Her champion died. If it hadn't been for Bart, she wouldn't have even gotten that Hall of Fame game. She would have been left twisting in the wind in AAA for a couple more years probably, and then let go, no matter what happened. They just were not going to let it happen at that point. And now that they are ready to let it happen, they're just, taking little baby steps to make sure it happens the way they want to see it happen, instead of just the way it will happen organically, which is, something wonderful and amazing when it does. So, but also something routine and unremarkable as well. And that's one of those beautiful paradoxes of baseball that I love, is that when the day that a woman breaks onto the major league staff, it will be the greatest day, in baseball in a century. But yet it will also be the first of being the new normal, where women aren't even noticed or mentioned or made a big deal out of. And that's all we want, is we just want to be a part of a crew. We don't want to be the one that stands out, the one that's the sore thumb that sticks out. We just want to be out there because we love the game like everybody else that's out there, and because we feel we have something to contribute. And women as umpires really do have something very special to contribute. And I don't know whether it's the way our brains are wired, but every woman umpire that I've ever worked with is really, really good. And I can't say that about every male partner I've ever worked with. Some of them are awful and should really think about doing something else. But all of the women that I've worked with have just been spectacular. Everyone.
We have just a couple of minutes left with Perry Barber, our guest this past hour. We do want to squeeze in some questions from our audience members. You can write your question, type it right into the Zoom group chat. In fact, we do have a question from Steve Sankner, one of our regular listeners and viewers. Steve wants to know, what do you think of all the rule changes in Major League Baseball this year? And actually last year as well, we saw the change in terms of relief pitchers have to face a minimum of 3 batters. We've seen the double headers now, 7 innings each game. The new extra inning rule, the runner starts at second. Your thoughts on some of these changes, Perry?
Yeah, you had a great discussion with Jason Stark the other day about some of the new rules changes. I was very thankful to be in on that because you did a great presentation. And some of them, like Jason said, some of them he loves. He loves that one with the runner on second base. Frankly, I viewed it with a bit of suspicion, because to me, this is another sign that baseball is losing its losing its character and borrowing so many things from amateur baseball, because we've been using that rule it's called a Texas shootout with the runner starting on second base. We've been using that rule for 30 years, and it's fun in amateur baseball, but it's not something that we expected to see in Major League Baseball. But if the rule helps the game get played and accelerates the pace of play so that it cuts down on the boring, nothing going on downtime, that to me is what baseball has to address. It's not the duration of the game, that it goes, like 3 hours, 3.5 hours. It's because within each half inning, the pace of play, if it reaches a dead spot, people lose interest, it gets boring. Yeah. That's what has to be addressed. And that's what an umpire can make a big difference in, addressing those things like batters stepping out of the box after every pitch. No, they got to stay in the box. That cuts half an hour off of the length of a game right there. Seriously, half an hour just by making the batters stay in the box. So anyway, most of us are not averse to rules changes if they improve the game, if they make the game better. Unfortunately, some of them, I don't see that happening, and it's kind of a mystery why they're even experimenting with them. And one of them to me is this robot umpire with the earpiece, where the umpire is basically getting instructions about what a pitch is from a series of cameras. And they've used that technology in the Atlantic League for the last couple of seasons, I think. And I've talked to some of the umpires that have used it, and it needs a lot of tweaking before it will be anywhere near ready for use at the major league level, much less anywhere else. So I would prefer to see baseball spending just a little bit of money on going out and recruiting women, getting them to go to the schools, rather than spending tens of millions of dollars on robot technology that, may be ready 4 or 5 years from now, but so will the 2 women that are in pro ball. So why not support actual human beings, to me? But no, robots before women. So that's always been baseball's way to sort of do things in an impenetrable way that, has fans and participants sort of scratching our heads, like what's going on. But so we don't mind rules changes. Baseball is a very fluid thing, always has been. But they're supposed to make baseball better. And some of them just don't seem to.
Yeah, I'm with you there. As a fan, the last thing I want to see is a robotic umpire on the field. That sounds a little much like the Jetsons. This is it's almost cartoonish in a way. To remove that kind
of. Just call me Rosie.
Yeah, that's right. I know that calling the strike zone is not easy, especially as hard as pitchers throw today. The movement on these hard sliders and these split-fingered fastballs. I know it's not easy, but that's part of the challenge of being an umpire, and there are those who do it well. And to take that ability to rule that away from them, I just don't see that as any kind of a good solution. Perry, this has been great. We really appreciate your time. You've given us a lot of insight into umpiring, past and present. Good luck this weekend with 8 games coming up in 2 days. Pace yourself, all right?
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks, everybody. Really enjoyed it.
We thank Perry Barber for being with us over this past hour. We also thank the Ford Motor Company, our generous sponsor, throughout all these programs in 2021. We hope you've enjoyed Virtual Voices of the Game here from the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, and also from the parking lot in Arizona, I believe it is. Or is it
New Mexico?
New Mexico, as Perry prepares to
do it is Arizona. No, you're right. I am in Arizona.
It is Arizona. All right.
I forgot. Where the hell am I?
Cooperstown to Arizona connection. Very good. Good luck this weekend, Perry. Thank you for being with us. Thanks, everybody, for being with us as well. Have a great day. Take care.